Actually meant the students were mentoring, teaching and encouraging one another as much as from the teacher. And what we see here is an enthusiastic and committed school leader who, as we'll see, is key to the process. And finally, what about in a challenging environment? A school that Ofsted would call a failing school, a school that's been dubbed as having special measures, turnover of teachers. Here's a teacher talking about a class where she's picked up the class as the third teacher in the same school year, behavioural difficulties, disaffected pupils, and she decides to talk about it as follows.
I used a managed learning environment in the classroom in the summer term when I was teaching literacy and numeracy to 9-year-olds. It was a deprived school. It had just come out of special measures. It was a very disrupted class. So it had 3 teachers already that year and there were lots of discipline problems. I used ICT a lot that term to engage them and motivate them to learn. We typed up our writing in Word, we used PowerPoints, we made videos of our trips, we did anything that I could think of to get them enjoying learning again. I used the managed learning environment at the end of term and several things struck me about it. Firstly, it has a certain cool factor with children. It was an instant hit and they constantly wanted to know when we were next logging on. It had a major impact particularly with boys who were reluctant learners and especially with reluctant writers. In the MLE that we used, there was a forum tool where there was an immediate real audience for the children's writing, which was their peer group. It was very motivating for them and it gave them a reason to write and to want to communicate. It gave me as a teacher the opportunity to discuss e-safety in a real and meaningful way. By letting the children make mistakes online in a safe environment, we would be able to tackle issues as they arose in the classroom. For me as a teacher as well, it gave me control over their use of online resources. You could keep them in one virtual room by being able to open up external websites within the managed learning environment and by embedding video and resources all in one place. It made me feel as if I had control over their online learning. Without an MLE, that isn't always the case. I suppose for me, a managed learning environment makes the most of the way that children naturally want to learn.
Great. So, these kind of children find it particularly cool. She found she could motivate reluctant learners, particularly those that were slow to write. Online, they write more because of the power of audience. Gives them a reason for writing and expressing themselves. Provided a first-person context to consider e-safety. The teacher felt confident because, unlike when children are online in the big wide world of the internet, the teacher felt in the learning environment she had more control to be able to direct the learning for these particular learners, making the most of the way children naturally want to learn. So let's move on to thinking about an individual classroom or teacher to the, oh no, let's just summarize that teachers who tend to do well with the learning platform, we find, are those who, having been assailed by the training, which tends to be focused on the functionality of the platform, dispense with that and start with, what's my problem? How can this technology help me? Starting with that tends to produce better results. Aiming for maximum output, not spending hours and hours preparing loads of stuff in the platform, but thinking about lots of output from the children for minimum input from me as a teacher, staying in control of the use of technology. Identifying issues it can solve for you. Typically, for example, asking, how can a learning platform help me engage and motivate my learners? Schools that are doing well are asking these questions. How can it help me improve differentiation? How to make more able children go further? Promoting student responsibility. How can I use it to involve parents more in their child's learning? Increasing student voice. Extending learning beyond the school gate and school time. How can it help me do those things? And our experience is, truly, it can and it does quite significantly. So let's go on to think about the whole school issue. What are the lessons that we've been learning from implementing a learning platform in schools from the kind of macro level of the school? Well, first and foremost, that it's not about the learning platform, it's about change management. It's all about change. It's 10% technology, perhaps 20% about the processes within the school. The rest of it's about effective change management, changing the way that teachers teach. I remember saying once at a conference, talking about security, internet filtering. Well, that's about the second hardest thing we do. So what's the hardest thing we do? The hardest thing we do is change the way that teachers teach. It's about change management. So here's a model that recognizes that bringing about change in any context requires vision, skills, incentives, resources, and action plans. And if there's no vision, we get confusion. If there's no skills, and we need skills training as well as pedagogical training for teachers, we get anxiety. If there's no incentive, we get a slow change. If there's no resources, we get frustration. If there's no action plans, we get false starts. And if there's no evaluation, well, we're uncertain as to whether we've actually made any benefit whatsoever. So that's just generic about complex change. So we recognize we must engage the school leadership team. We know that school leaders, and particularly in the UK, head teachers have significant local responsibility. In fact, the influence of heads and school leaders is so prevailing that if we do not engage with them in understanding what it is about new technologies that enriches learning and why is this important to the young people in their care, then everything else that we do, grids for learning, content online learning platforms, all of that, is at risk of being marginalized. And this kind of stuff will be the domain of purely the enthusiast, the individual teacher who's interested. So we have to engage the school leadership team. So before we even let them see a learning platform, we organize a meeting with the senior management team to sit down and think about what are we going to do, how are we going to do it, what's this going to involve. And then we come back several months later and review that with the senior management team. We've also recognized that as part of the process of transformation, we have to provide training for school leaders, and we do so in London under the heading of next generation learning, digital technologies, and institutional change. And we found a particular tool that was useful that you can't read because the text is too small, but you get the concept. This progression matrix, which just takes a number of elements where there has to be change, and we work through with our consultants, where are you as a school on this matrix in these elements? How are you going to get from the left to the right? So, change management in the schools, really important. Working at a regional level, what have we learned? Well, we've learned a number of things that may be of interest to you if you are trying to work within a university and bringing faculties or departments together, or you're in government and you're thinking about how can you work across a department that's made up of lots of sub-departments. How do you get, frankly, autonomous public bodies to work together successfully? Because there's so much that mitigates against that. Ultimately in the public sector, you can't make anybody do something they don't want to do unless you pass a law. That's my experience. People only do what they want to do. So how do you get them to do what you want them to do? Well, you get the right governance and leadership. You have to establish a clear governance structure and enfranchise your stakeholders. They have to own it. They have to engage. They have to be part of it. It has to be them. London Grid for Learning, for example, isn't me and my little staff. It's all of London's local authorities working together. I keep telling them that, and now they believe it. It's important to serve, not to try and dictate. You're the cogs, I'm just the oil. But you get the opportunity to lead as well and say, this is the way, let's go in it. So it's about servant leadership.